Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Debbie Corgelis, and I'm a board member of the Mahwah Municipal Alliance. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I want to take a moment to thank Valley Health System for partnering with us to bring this important information to our community. We have Liz Lucas from Valley with us tonight. During the program, you can put your questions into the chat, and at the end, we'll have them answered. I also want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this presentation. Tomorrow morning, students at Mahwah High School will be seeing an assembly program called The Dangerous Truth About Marijuana, Johnny Stack's Life and Death Story, presented by Laura Stack, his mother. She shares with students how her 19-year-old son died by suicide after becoming delusional from dabbing high THC marijuana concentrates. Her mission is to educate teens about the dangers of youth marijuana use. Tonight, we asked Kevin Sabet to speak with the community about what is going on related to the legalization of marijuana and its increase in potency over the years. Kevin Sabet is an affiliate of the Institution for Social and Policy Studies and the Medical School at Yale University, and dubbed by NBC News as the prodigy of drug politics, and by Salon as the quarterback of the new anti-drug movement. Author, consultant, and advisor to 3 U.S. presidential administrations, he has studied, researched, written about, and implemented drug policy for over 25 years. He is the only person appointed by Republican and Democrat to work in the White House Drug Office. Kevin is currently the president and CEO of the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions and Smart Approaches to Marijuana. His latest book, Smokescreen: What the Marijuana Industry Doesn't Want You to Know, won the Next Generation Indie Book Award and has been optioned for a documentary film. His upcoming book, One Nation Under the Influence, will be published in 2025. He received his doctorate and master's degree from Oxford University. Please give a warm welcome to Kevin Sabet.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here tonight. Appreciate it. I just got off a plane a few hours ago from Lisbon, Portugal, where I was at an addictions conference. So if I jumble my words a little bit, it's, I don't know, 1 in the morning for me, but I'm very happy to be with you all. And please feel free to put questions in the chat box or the the Q&A box. I'll do all the questions afterwards, and then I'm going to go ahead and we have just tell my folks to we're going to start the presentation. Thank you so much. So I'm very excited to talk about lessons learned in legalized states. You know, there's a lot of misconceptions about what's happening out there. So it's just an honor for me to be here. Many of you know about who we are, SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, a nonpartisan, but relatively high profile. We were co-founded by Democratic Congressman Patrick Kennedy, as well as David Frum, who once served in the George W. Bush administration. We have a very well-known scientific advisory board that does a lot of research on the marijuana and hundreds of thousands of press mentions out there. And we really try and be that voice for everybody on this issue, for those that are fighting the good fight here and really promoting prevention. The New York Times has called us the well-coordinated opposition. And we work with all kinds of folks from around the country, whether it's the NAACP, whether it is local affiliates in different states, doctors from around the country, people internationally and around the world. So we work very hard on this issue of marijuana prevention and policy. We also collaborate with multiple organizations, multiple medical organizations and others to try and get the word out, as well as treatment, recovery, law enforcement, etc. You know, we think that there has been really a false dichotomy presented that said that we either have to legalize marijuana or we have to incarcerate and put people in prison and criminalize low-level use. And we're actually saying that this is a false dichotomy. This is not really the only 2 choices for drug policy when it comes to marijuana. Obviously, New Jersey has already legalized marijuana, but there's still a lot you can do, and a lot that doesn't fall in this dichotomy of, you know, commercialization, normalization, and criminalization. In fact, there's 3 issues that often get conflated, and I think a lot of people in New Jersey that voted for this originally, and we were, you know, there, as many of you know, in the fight with our affiliate then, NJ Ramp. But a lot of what people thought they were voting on was really the decriminalization of marijuana, the removing of the criminal penalties. And that's very different than the medicinal compounds, which other people thought that it was really about. which is also different from legalizing use, sales, production, and distribution. Full legalization, full commercialization. These three things are very, very different. And it's really important that we realize that we realize the fact that, these are different policies. And I think often when people say they're in favor of legalization, they're actually in favor of more modest reforms. We're in an election season right now, obviously, if you couldn't tell. And this election, what's interesting about it is that the last two presidents, our current president, as well as the president before, President Trump, and President Biden, and actually President Obama's surgeons general, all agree on this one issue, which is the fact that marijuana is a dangerous drug that's far more potent. Our current Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, has said this. He said it to Congress. He said it when he was in the Obama administration, as well as the Biden administration, that marijuana is addictive, and it's something that we really need to keep an eye on. And it's very similar to what the previous Surgeon General said, which, again, in this kind of contentious political environment, is really important to remember that really there's no multiple sides of this. There's just what the science is and what the truth is. And the truth is that today's marijuana is much more addictive, much more harmful than it ever could be. The other truism that's out there that we need to realize is that big money interests are trying to promote, legalize, and commercialize marijuana just to make money for themselves and their shareholders. As one little example, this industry leak that we were able to get a hold of showed a document about how interests could really dominate the industry to create what they said it was a big weed oligopoly. So, next time someone says around the Thanksgiving dinner table, maybe, that really this is about social justice and it's an idea whose time has come, we really need to remind them that this isn't really about social justice at all. It's about money. It's about profit. And that's what we're seeing all across the country. We're seeing the fact that really it's big tobacco that's taken over this whole industry in many, many ways. There's many other players as well. It's not just big tobacco, but they're investing billions and billions of dollars into creating this alternative product line that they think can be really lucrative for them. So it's really a lot of the same players, just slightly different marketing. We also, know that the alcohol industry wants in, that multiple alcohol businesses have actually invested in marijuana. They've created their own product lines, their own beverages, and they're fighting for things that we never thought we would have to defend. Things like the Clean Air Act. Where this industry really wants to roll back the hard-fought gains of the big tobacco movement. And that's very, very problematic, I think, in terms of, public health and the fact that this was not easy. We take it for granted today, but it wasn't easy. As I said, I just got off a plane a few hours ago, and I'm grateful that plane was smoke-free coming from Europe. That's thanks to the anti-tobacco warriors, frankly, over the last century that were initially laughed at and scoffed at and told to leave the room because they did not have the money and the interest that big tobacco had to buy off basically every politician alive. And eventually we realized, and we sort of had to burn our finger to realize that the oven was hot. But when we finally realized that we had burned off our finger and we started to roll back tobacco's influence, this is one of the hard-fought gains that we won, which was to stop indoor smoking and smoking around other people. And now the marijuana industry wants to undo all of that. They're creating marijuana cafes and restaurants as we speak in California. They are trying to have spaces where you can consume marijuana. So hotels, hotel lobbies and rooftops and other places, whether it's outdoor or indoor, public, to be able to use to spread their influence. And, it's really, really, we really have to realize what this is about. It's about targeting our kids. It's about targeting the next generation of customers. And, you might be thinking, well, New Jersey already legalized. Why does this matter? It matters a lot because there's still a lot of policy to be written. No policy is set in stone. This is not an amendment to the Constitution that they legalized it federally or anything. We can actually roll this back in many, many ways, many different ways than just pure repeal. But in Oregon and California and other places, if your kid's in kindergarten, it's not considered a school. And so they're proposing dispensaries and they're actually building them right next to schools. Think about the influence this has. Think about if we would ever let a tobacco operator do this or a casino. We really, really are walking into something here that we sometimes don't realize how destructive and damaging it can be. And when you have the former big pharma, OxyContin CEO selling medical marijuana now, we realize that he realizes that this is something that can be popular from an unpopular industry of big pharma to a popular industry of marijuana. And so when he's now involved, I think we really need to take stock about what's actually happening and what we're allowing to happen. This is about big business. This is not about mom and pop. This is about branding, product placement, PR, marketing, Wall Street, investments. This is what this is about. It's not about mom and pop shops. And there right now, the marijuana industry is greatly succeeding in increasing the number of users of marijuana. The fact that we're almost equal with the number of people that use tobacco products and marijuana products in the last month is astounding when you look at the gulf from 20 years ago, what that looked like. I mean, look at what's happening. This is a result of marketing and of deceit by the marijuana industry. In fact, now we actually have more daily or near daily marijuana users in this country than we do alcohol users. That is totally astounding. We never would have thought that. Even in 2015, we wouldn't have thought that that would happen. And now look at what's happening. This is data from John Calkins on this. So, it's very, very concerning, in fact, what we're seeing. So we know that legalizations actually led to three big things: skyrocketing potency, increasing addiction, and mental health concerns being increased. And it all comes down to the fact that today's marijuana is not Woodstock weed. This is not stuff that was used in the 60s and 70s, or even in early 2000s at 5% THC. These are products that are infused with high levels of marijuana. These are kid-friendly. They come in shapes and colors attractive to children, like candy and soda. Even it's hard to even find smokable joints, flower, as they say, that's less than 20% these days. They're often higher than that. Very aggressive marketing with free samples and billboards and other big tobacco-like tactics. Contaminants. Just in one state 9 years ago, there was a recall of hundreds of thousands, but we don't have to go 9 years ago. We can go last year. We can go this year. And then fighting the regulation, the pot industry lobbying so hard against common sense regulations, dosing rules, labels, and bans on targeting children. We've also seen just rampant commercialization. So when you look at Colorado, which was the first state to legalize, they're consistently one of the top states for youth initiation of marijuana in the country. When you look at a thriving underground market, so they didn't get rid of drug dealers just because they legalized marijuana. And we've tried to go in there and put caps on THC. That's failed. We've tried to limit the number and location of stores. That failed. Money has been diverted to the general fund. This isn't exactly funding schools even, or funding education. In fact, just today, the Baltimore Sun, which is very much in favor of marijuana, actually wrote an editorial saying, why are we celebrating the fact that we get all this tax money from marijuana? That maybe that's not a good idea. I mean, they sort of finally come around, right, after this happens, even though we try and warn people. So it really is about this ultra potent marijuana. It's about shatter, waxes, really high potency marijuana, super highly concentrated. We've genetically bred marijuana to be much more harmful, much more powerful, and thus harmful than we used to. And the industry itself, because this industry has been allowed to thrive in the open, they have been able to innovate like any other business. And they've innovated by distilling marijuana and creating these incredible, highly potent waxes that are out there. And these shatters that show this isn't really just a plant anymore. This is a totally different drug that is a result of distilling the marijuana and getting the liquid, right? When you mix it with a solvent, getting that really high potent marijuana coming out, the high potent THC. And we're paying the price right now. The latest statistics is that 1 in 3 people who used marijuana in the past month are addicted. That's much higher than the old numbers. I even see the old numbers being used by people in our field not knowing that they would have changed. They say 9%, they say 11%, they say 1 in 11. It's not 1 in 11, it's 1 in 3. That is a huge number. When the adolescent brain is so susceptible to marijuana use, that means if you start when you're younger, you have a greater chance of addiction because your brain is being primed and pruned and really creating these centers and these pathways that start forming your preferences. And when you start using drugs early, those preferences are more likely to stay and they're more likely to be very profound. So when you have 30% of people who use marijuana have a marijuana use disorder, 7 times more people before the age of 18. That's your risk of increase of cannabis use disorder. And then now when you have 25% increase of cannabis use disorder in legalized states among young people, we really should be seeing the warning signs, ringing the alarm bells. I think one of the biggest negative consequences that we've seen in the last 10 years with this has been the growing mental health concerns, specifically psychosis. And now you're seeing daily users of highly potent marijuana who are 5 times more likely to suffer from a psychotic disorder than those who never use marijuana. And that, we have early data that from the left about schizophrenia. Then we have more recent data, which is, which we have even more recent data than this, but earlier age of use leading to schizophrenic risk. Schizophrenia, you don't really come back from that. I mean, think of a psychotic episode as a coughing fit, and then think about schizophrenia as COPD. It's very severe, and it's something you wouldn't wish on anybody. And yet, of all the drugs, even methamphetamine, we're seeing marijuana correlated with this more than others. In fact, a very new study out of Europe showed that 30% of cases of schizophrenia among men aged 21 to 30 might have been prevented, by averting cannabis use disorder. 30%. We don't see those numbers for anything. There's no other risk factor that's like that. That's like 30%. That's a huge, huge, huge number. When we see 51% now more traffic fatalities in Colorado, so shifting over to the harms to other people, because we can't just talk about harms to the individual, although when you have mental health disorder, you're not only hurting yourself, you're hurting everyone around you. So we shouldn't think of it like that. It's not only the individual that suffers, it's the families, the friends, the neighbors, the people that rely on you, your employer, other people like when you drive. And that's why this increase is astounding now, that 1 in 4 road deaths in Colorado involve marijuana. That's an incredible number. Most Coloradans think that marijuana doesn't even affect your driving. Most young people think it doesn't affect your driving. In fact, we know that from surveys, that there is still a high percentage of kids that think it doesn't affect you. And, we should not be surprised by this when you actually see how our alcohol consumption is, when we know that the 10% of the population make up 75% of the alcohol sales. It's very similar with marijuana. It's a smaller number of people that make up the vast majority of sales. And so this industry really, it's an incentive for them to promote heavy use. Even in the last, 8 years, it's incredible in a state like Colorado how many adults use marijuana daily versus how many use marijuana daily now. I mean, over half of adults who used marijuana used it daily. That's an incredible number. And really, it speaks to the fact that we need more education. When you look at past year marijuana use in New Jersey, 13.7% in 2017, 2018, the latest data we have, and we're going to get new data soon. Our data lags, unfortunately, but 19.4%. Again, that's a 50% increase in a matter of a couple of years. Well, that's because we've legalized, normalized, and commercialized marijuana. Past month use also almost a 50%, a little bit less among those 12 and older. The chair of emergency medicine, the University Hospital in Newark, Dr. Lewis Nelson, has said since the number of young children presenting to the ED prior to the legalization of cannabis in the state could be counted on one hand, the fact that we now see several cases a month represents a substantial increase. This is happening directly because of the commercialization and the normalization that we've seen of marijuana and marijuana products. And when you look at the average non-legal state level versus the average legal state level, it's dramatically different. It's dramatically higher in the legal states. This was not always the case. These were not always the top states, but they are now. And you look at what states are illegal, what states are legal, and you can make those inferences yourself. We have totally changed the perception of risk among young people. So we had almost 80% of high school seniors said there is a great risk, not even some risk, a great risk associated with using marijuana regularly. Now it's barely 1 in 3. that think that there's a great risk for using it regularly. The edible related poison control calls from ages 0 to 12, again, we need to have more accurate latest data, but that data doesn't exist yet. Over a 3,000% increase in the last 8 years. That's an incredible number. Again, we don't see that number for anything else in the drug field. Even the increases in overdoses, we don't see it going up 3,000% like that in the last couple of years. New Jersey Poison Information and Education System has shown a 600% increase of unintentional exposures by kids under 5. I have a kid under 5. That's really scary. It's because when there are shiny gummies and shiny edibles out there and these products created by the industry, you're going to see more unintentional exposures. And you're seeing this all across the country. I mean, you pick any of these legalized states, you're seeing ER visits skyrocket. And even among older people, sometimes we say, well, as long as it's older, it's okay. Actually, for a lot of Americans who have a very high heart attack risk, as is given the #1 cause of death in this country, when you look at heart attack and stroke, the risk significantly increases if you use marijuana. But I don't think that information is getting out there. I don't think most cardiologists know this, frankly, let alone most Americans. This industry has done a beautiful, wonderful job from their perspective, of course, of hiding the harms, intentionally downplaying the harms so that they can make more money. And we see this affecting multiple sectors in society, including the workforce. And some of that is scary. I mean, it's one thing if you're a white collar worker, that's bad enough. You're costing your employee money. You are probably late to work. You're not as productive. You're absent more often. But when you see these highly sensitive jobs, pilots, train operators, truck drivers, other kinds of drivers, that is very, very scary. And we're seeing post-accidental marijuana positivity skyrocket among the general workforce and among the safety-sensitive workforce. In fact, if you're in a legalized state, you've seen a 50% increase, reaching a 26-year high in marijuana positives. That is huge, and it's something that we need to really understand is going to have a problem. We've had recent studies showing a 10% increase, marijuana legalization being associated with workplace injuries, which I think is very, very sad, very difficult among those aged 20 to 34. So it affects other people, and there's this notion that it doesn't, right? There's this notion that it really is only your problem and if it hurts you, but the reality is it's hurting other people. One of the promises that we got from the marijuana industry was that we would be able to get rid of the illegal market. In other words, the underground market would go away because we're legalizing marijuana and the players will become, legitimate drug dealers, as well as illegitimate ones, like they'd be getting the liquor business, same thing. But the reality is we haven't seen that at all. The New York Times did a story a number of years ago, which is still true, that the illegal pot market is booming despite legalization in California. You go to other states, and well, you still stick with California, and again, it's very far from eliminating the underground market. You go to Oregon, all of the states, it's the minority that's sold legally. And there's some people that say, well, no, we have studies showing that the majority of sales are from the legal market. I just haven't seen good evidence on that, even though that's, people claim that. And now we're seeing an incredible development that we never thought we would see. It's sort of, it's head scratching, but Chinese-owned marijuana grows. And so Chinese organized crime are now going as far as places like Maine. Okay, this isn't like rural California. This isn't the Pacific Northwest, Maine, and other states like Oklahoma. Billions of dollars worth of marijuana grows, and they're hiding other illicit businesses as well. This is a front for other businesses, but they're also making a lot of money. And they're sending their proceeds back to China. It's enabling foreign cartels. There's a business that started as a result of legal. This never happened before without legalization. Actually, the marijuana market was relatively nonviolent, and it was much smaller when it was illegal in every state. It has grown in ways we never thought it would. As we mentioned, driving, I want to go back to it. The other slides I showed just as an example of how this affects other people, but it's really important to talk about how, AAA opposes the legalization of marijuana for recreational use because of its inherent traffic safety risks, they say. So AAA is not in favor of it. JAMA, the American Medical Association is, by the way, not in favor of it. There was an article in JAMA showing that federal legalization would bring 7,000 more driving deaths at least nationally. And again, we're just seeing this over and over in places like Colorado and all across the country. The other part of this that I think really is the main reason why this was sold was social justice. Actually, if you look at arrest rates, they're not as great as you think. But before we get there, let's look at where these dispensaries are concentrated. They're concentrated in communities of color. This is one example. This is Denver. But you can look at other cities. You can look at other states. You can look at California, where minority populations are disproportionately exposed to both, sort of legitimate and illegitimate marijuana stores, because there's a lot of illegitimate ones that pop up. If you've been to New York City, although they're trying to clamp down now, but if you've been there recently, you've seen all these, Weed World and all of these shops that are totally unlicensed. But the reality is, these are concentrated in poor communities of color. And this matters because, first of all, they're selling to young people. So they're saying, oh, they wouldn't sell to people. In Arizona, they found 20% of dispensaries are selling to 12th graders where they're not allowed to buy it, 13% to 10th graders, 8% to 8th graders. That's an incredible number just in one state alone, a state with not even a very mature legalization market. And very few businesses are actually owned and operated by minorities. In fact, only 4% of them are owned by Black Americans. This was supposed to be the big promise, and it's not at all. It's frankly a lot of wealthy people laughing all the way to the bank. And so we are seeing multiple community impacts as a result. First of all, when you have a dispensary near your house, there are studies showing 3 to 4% value in your home drops as a result of a marijuana store. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised. I've never heard of a realtor saying that, my client is looking for a house, wants to live near a pot shop. You don't hear that a lot. So it's not surprising. But also crime at these dispensaries are rising, whether it's burglaries or break-ins. We're seeing increases even in when we can measure it from year to year. And again, a lot of this data we need to update because we don't have more current data, but it's still very troubling. Some people think this is, is it because they're cash only? Actually, the reality is most marijuana transactions are not cash only anymore. There are debit cards, there are community banks, there are, Tap, Apple Pay. There are mechanisms to pay for marijuana without your cash, and the majority of them are doing that. You talk to any honest person in the marijuana business, they'll tell you that the majority of the transactions are not cash. Some still deal with cash, obviously, but this idea that they're being robbed because they have cash, and if they didn't have cash, they wouldn't be robbed. That's like saying jewelry stores should never be robbed because they take credit card, right? Why are jewelry stores ever robbed? Well, because they have an expensive product. They have a valuable product. And that's exactly what is the case with marijuana. So we often hear this as an excuse to allow the marijuana business in the banking system, in the financial system, because the marijuana industry desperately wants that so that they can get institutional investment, VCs, and others to come in. The reality is this excuse they use about cash is completely false. There's even been studies showing that violent crime is increasing after legalization. When you look at violent crime rates per 100,000, is it because of legalization? I don't know if that's the only reason. The reality is, though, we were told crime was supposed to plummet because now police could focus on crimes as opposed to focus on arresting people. Folks, people are not being put in prison for marijuana before legalization or after. And while there are still arrests for marijuana than there were obviously before legalization, those arrests, they're still arrests because it's still technically illegal to use in public or behind the wheel or to sell to minors or use it around a minor. But what's interesting is when you look at, black and white arrests, you're still seeing disproportionate rates. In fact, the rate of black arrests, the number of blacks arrested is the same number it was 20 years ago now. So where is the social justice that we were promised? It's not happening because it had nothing to do with marijuana legalization. It was all about money. And I talked about money for the investors, money for the pot shops, but also money for the government. And the government's not really making money. That's kind of the joke of the whole thing, is that it's less than 1% of any budget. In fact, New Jersey itself, 0.04% comes from all your marijuana sales. So it's not really because of that, but that's the purported reason we hear people say, yeah, we want you to buy legally and, help fill our state coffers. it's such a tiny amount, and it's not paying for the costs. There was one study we did in Connecticut of costs, estimated cost in 2016 dollars of yearly of marijuana use, of marijuana legalization, 216 million. It was double even the high estimate of marijuana revenue. So we're not seeing that. It does not at all go to those costs. What about marijuana and public opinion? So when you see that and you hear that, oh, well, everybody wants to use, everybody wants marijuana legalization. It's just, today in the New York Times, the newsletter was, it's an issue that Republicans and Democrats agree on, 70%, right? According to Gallup. There's more there than meets the eye. First of all, a majority of localities in all the legal states have actually opted out of having a marijuana store in their own backyard. So when you actually ask them if they want marijuana legalization in their community, they say they don't. So that's the number one thing. The other thing is when you actually asked after they've implemented, a Washington Post University of Maryland poll said that 1 in 3 Marylanders, for example, believe that legalization was good for their state in 2024. 2 in 3, by the way, approved marijuana 2 years before legalization. They approved. So that number, those numbers don't correspond. The support is not as widespread as it seems. And in 2022, as well as 2024, Gallup asked, what effect does the use of marijuana have on society? It went from a 49% positive effect in 2022 to a 41% positive effect. 50% negative effect in 2022 to a 54% negative effect outside the margin of error for 2024. So, people, I think, might be waking up to the fact that this isn't the best thing ever. And when you look at also on individuals, 53% it has a positive effect, down to 43% according to Gallup now. That's a big difference. That's a very big difference in 2 years. These are numbers that are often not put in these articles about legalization. 68% of Americans want options other than legalization, according to a national Emerson poll. When you give people options, not just legal yes or no, but actually decriminalization, medical marijuana, a modified version of prohibition, etc., you actually get different answers. So these binary questions are going to produce lopsided results. We're not very surprised. But of course, where marijuana has been legal, and in New Jersey, we've been trying to do this. First of all, we reiterate the fact, as I just told you, that often municipalities can opt out of having marijuana dispensaries, and so that's important. Number two, we really want people to prioritize in prevention and education, because and treatment. I mean, even $1 in treatment sells 12 in social costs. $1 in prevention saves that much in even more in treatment costs. So we know what we have to do. But unfortunately, in these legal states, because the industry is so powerful, we haven't been able to actually pass, get education campaigns going, get more prevention campaigns going. We need that. If you've legalized in your state, like in New Jersey, we need a science-based public awareness campaign. It needs to be implemented across multiple forms of media. Drug driving prevention needs to be a priority. And we need to raise awareness about psychedelics, because that's the next drug that folks are trying to legalize. Because this isn't about just marijuana, as you know. This is about all drugs. This is about legalizing, they say decriminalize, but really legalizing the use, at least, as well as the sales of all drugs. They legalized the use in Oregon. We thankfully helped to repeal that. We're very proud of that. But the reality is there's a lot of work we need to do in these legal states, like in New Jersey. We need to have strict potency caps. I mean, there's no need for anything higher than 10 or 15%. Why do we have that? We need to restrict these concentrates as much as possible. Why do you have 99% products? And by the way, don't think you know what you're getting, because a lot of these products are constantly recalled, or they're not, but they're actually making people really sick because they have molds and pesticides, bacteria, additives, all of these things that are in there. And, marijuana is a very fussy and a very wet, energy-intensive plant. And if you think that these pot dispensaries that are, by the way, not making much money anymore, only the big ones are, but the smaller ones aren't at all. They're losing money, actually. If you think that they're throwing product away because they see a little mold on something, I have a bridge to sell you, because they're not. They are packaging that, they are using that, and they are contaminated. We actually have a whole potency toolkit, by the way, that you can download if you want to scan that QR code there. We also need to prohibit advertisements aimed at young people. On social media, print media, billboard, radio, podcast, digital media. I mean, this is advertising that is targeting young people. All of this is. It's making this fun. It's big tobacco all over again. It's Newport Alive with Pleasure updated for 2024. And it's all because of this massive and growing industry. We also do not need any rule-making body that regulates marijuana. None of them should have a financial stake in the industry while serving on that body. We need to have clear ethical standards that prohibit marijuana regulators from working in the industry after leaving their regulatory position. We need to, frankly, ban government employees, legislators, and those who serve on these regulatory bodies from ever working at a marijuana company that makes money off of this. We're seeing this, for example, in tobacco. There was an investigative reporter that looked into what's happening with tobacco. Tobacco's hiring all the FDA lawyers to roll back all the tobacco regulations and the vaping regulations, menthol cigarettes, etc. We should not allow that. We should not allow that for marijuana, but we are naive to think that we can easily stop it. We are naive to think that we can legalize it and then easily stop it, because it's very, very difficult to do so. In fact, there is so much conflict of interest out there, and we know about a lot of them. Only some of them come above the surface to actually trigger a resignation. That happened last year with the Secretary of State of Oregon that had a $10,000 a month contract with a marijuana company at the time that they were auditing the state's marijuana program. So, I mean, this is kind of ridiculous, but we're seeing this all across the country. We need reports and much better data. And there's a lot we need data on, not just if use is up or down. We need data on environmental impacts. We need data on drug driving reporting. We need much better data on hospitalization and ED visits, other impacts to children and youth, marijuana-induced psychosis, rising potency, THC-related poison control calls, rates of workers testing positive for THC. We need that. We need that desperately, because we need to be understanding what we're doing here. So, if you want to read up on a lot of this, we have more than you'll ever want in terms of access to resources, toolkits, one-pagers, and all of that that are on our website. So you can easily scan this to get that, to access our social media. We have something called the Drug Report now, which is in your inbox about every other day, with the top headlines curated from across the web that you can click on to just read what are the 10 headlines you need to know that day about drugs generally, not just marijuana. That's a really important, really useful resource. And you can email us anytime. You can go to our website, and we will absolutely be here for you to be really your voice on marijuana issues. So thank you so much for having me, and it was really wonderful to be with you, and I'm looking forward to taking some questions now. So I'll turn it over. Thanks so much. Great. So we do have some questions that have come in. I'm happy to just take them directly. Someone just said thank you, so I thank you for being here. The other question was, could the same policies used to regulate big tobacco, such as flavor bans, be applied to the cannabis industry? With a recent JAMA study identifying 260 cannabis flavors being marketed, is there potential for similar regulatory actions to address health concerns? It's a very good question. Right now marijuana is in a really kind of strange place in a sense, because it's illegal federally, which I think is good, because I think when you legalize it, you open the door to promotion and commercialization. But it's certainly not an ideal policy right now, because you have states like New Jersey and others that are openly defying federal law and just going their own way, doing what they want, and there's zero oversight over what they're doing. So yeah, in theory, could you have an FDA, if it was legal, exercising more oversight? In theory, you could, but I don't think in practice that you would. I don't think that the FDA would be able to enforce what's going on. I think it's going to have to come from the states themselves. If marijuana is ever legalized federally, obviously we will be pushing very hard for these kinds of regulations, like flavor bans, but it's hard to see how that would be enforced with just the current structure at FDA and the way things are. It's it's very difficult. Things aren't being enforced now as it is, and it's illegal. So, the idea, I think it's a little bit naive. There are some academics out there, well-meaning, of course, and colleagues of mine who say, well, we just, the reason why we should legalize it is so that the federal government could actually put in some regulations and actually get their hands around it. But I don't know that that is so easy to happen. And then you also have to balance that with the fact that the industry would just be supersized completely. It'd be much bigger than it is now. And so, the government going against that industry, I think it would be very, very difficult, a very, very difficult one. So I think that would be hard. Let me just see if I had any other questions here. The presentation will be sent to you, I believe. So it will be, which is great. And please, I don't know if anyone has any other questions they would like to ask.
Can I ask
Yeah,
a question? I'm not able to because I'm a panelist, but
please.
for smoking and vaping, we're talking to kids as they come into middle school. Is there research that's identified what age, interventions are helpful for marijuana use to kind of prevent marijuana use? Have you come across anything?
Well, I mean, the research always says for all drugs, it's the earlier the better. It's not just for marijuana. I mean, when you think about marijuana, these are these entry drugs that are of widely available, acceptable, and normalized. And it used to be, cigarettes, marijuana, and alcohol, or in the order it was cigarettes, alcohol, and marijuana. And cigarettes obviously are out of vogue, but vaping. So it's a vaping, alcohol, and marijuana. And so the interventions would work similarly with all three. And it is earlier the better. I mean, I don't mean that literally, because I'm not saying, at 1 year old, obviously you can't understand. But when you talk about this, you should be talking about this around 12 or 13, because this is now when people and kids are being introduced to this. Part of the other issue and big issue with marijuana we have, which is what we have with alcohol and tobacco too, is that many parents are using it. And so it's completely normalized with young people. And young people should know that even if their parents use it, it's not good for them. And that's a real tough one, because some parents use it for purported medical purposes, whether it's legitimate or not. And so it's hard for a young person to understand why this isn't good, if it's actually, how can something be bad for you if it's good for you, right? And we didn't get into this, but the whole entry into how we even got here with legalization started with medical marijuana. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't medical properties in marijuana. There probably are, and there are drugs that are approved by the FDA that actually are based on marijuana, and that's fine. No one has a problem with that. But the political part of this was that this was really a nose under the, camel's nose under the tent. This was really the first step that activists took to soften the image and to make it sound, not only not bad for you, but actually good for you. So this is a challenge with prevention, because like I said, you have all these parents that are using it in ways that their parents never did at all. And I mean, their parents, the baby boomers, they might have, but they did it when they were teenagers, not as parents. But this new the generation after the baby boomers, the Gen X parents and beyond, they're now using it very openly, and it's accepted. So that's a big challenge that we have for sure.
I actually had another one too, if you don't mind me asking.
Please.
Another was, I have a college age daughter, and we've talked about marijuana, and in a legalized state, is it better if someone's going to use marijuana and you can't convince them not to, and in a legalized state, in theory, would it be better to purchase from a dispensary than, because where the product is coming from, or kind of everything's the same?
Yeah, in theory, but actually often that product's worse, because these products, when they're being tested, you don't know what you're getting. And so people need to understand that just because they're buying it from a storefront, that does not mean that there's any oversight. It might look okay because you're buying it from a store. And so mentally you identify that with something that's regulated well. Like when you go to the grocery store, you have pretty good assurances that the chicken you're buying doesn't have salmonella in it. And by the way, if it did, all the chicken would be recalled from everywhere and it'd be hard to get chicken. Um, with marijuana, you don't know what you're getting. And that's what I always say to people, buyer beware. If you think you know what you're getting at the dispensary or whatever, you just don't. So, is it better? You really can't, we can't answer that question. In many ways, we're seeing it's worse. There's no real sort of federal labs that are looking at this stuff because it is illegal. And so there's no FDA certified labs. A lot of the labs in these states, they're fly-by-night operations. They're in cahoots with the marijuana industry. I didn't plug it, but I wrote a book called Smokescreen. And in that book, I interviewed, former operators of labs who were talking about how problematic it is and how they actually don't really know what they're testing often, or they're in cahoots with the industry. I mean, it's really bad. So, yeah, I would just say buyer beware. There are a couple other questions. One asks about, can employers drug test at random? Yes, actually, in New Jersey, I mean, there are some uh, exceptions to this about how you test in New Jersey. And there is a law basically saying you cannot refuse to hire somebody because they use it. However, the law in New Jersey does recognize an employer's right to maintain a drug-free workplace and enforce policies prohibiting the use during work hours. But so basically, it's not acceptable during work hours. That's very hard to delineate in terms of how do you kind of know that. So yes, they can drug test, but in terms of what comes after that, we're not exactly sure. And it kind of varies, actually, I've heard in New Jersey by the employer and by kind of what they're doing. So it's yeah, it's actually a very tricky question. There was another question saying, is there research that shows that social media has on influencing young people in marijuana use? I recently finished reading the book, The Anxious Generation, which is a very good book. There is research. There's peer-reviewed research showing that it's all over social media, that there's mass commercialization, mass advertising, and that there's actually a direct relationship with kids using social media, and marijuana being promoted, and therefore having softer attitudes on the drug. So yes, there is. No, you can Google it, that there is peer-reviewed research that is actually pretty good research that's being done on that. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? I think I'll just close with, I think that the argument for young people that is the most resonant is the one that talks about the industry, because young people don't want to be taken for a ride by a greedy industry that wants to profit off of them, certainly not this generation. And I think that's very useful to talk about with your loved ones, with your younger loved ones, about how this is about an industry that just wants to make money, and they're using, your brain as a dollar sign. And that's what they see your brain as a dollar sign if you're under 25 years old, because you can be a lifelong customer. And that's exactly what Big Tobacco did. And then talk to them about Big Tobacco, talk to them about what the tobacco industry did, the tactics they use very specific tactics, actually. And those are being totally mimicked by the marijuana industry, one by one by one by one. That's a great topic to talk about with young people when you broach this issue. We're very happy to help. So anything we can do at SAM, please let us know if we can help you, if we can do trainings, webinars, or whatnot. We're very, very happy to do that. If you go to learnaboutsam.org, as I said in the presentation, you can get in touch with us. I have various people messaging me, thanking me here and chatting me. So I want to really thank you all. This was really I had a wonderful time. I hope it was helpful. And I will turn it back over to our wonderful panelists. And I really want to thank you for inviting me, and really the coalition for the work that you're doing. It's really, really important to do. It's really the bedrock of awareness is prevention. By the way, a question came in your travels. Have you come across middle school or high school clubs or events to help spread awareness? There are some high school clubs, Students Against Destructive Decisions, SAD. I wish they would do a little bit more on this. Frankly, I also blame myself for that. We're very busy as an organization, but we should probably have stronger links with a group like SAD. I love talking to young people about this issue. I know tomorrow Laura Stack is talking. She's my good friend. Please tell her I said hi. I'll probably text her right now. Very glad she's here. So there are events and things you can do at the school. It is Red Ribbon Week coming up, so this is really a chance to spread awareness. So and then again, I would just ask each one of you to talk to people that and talk about this issue, because it's always something that's interesting that people want to talk about. Everyone seems to have an opinion on it, but most people don't realize that this is about money and it's about an industry that's copying big tobacco. So I think that would be ideal. So again, thank you all. It was really wonderful to be here. Elizabeth?
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And thank you everyone for your great questions. I'd also like to thank the Mahwah Municipal Alliance for allowing Valley to be involved. And it's been a great opportunity to work with all of you. You'll be getting an email